You assume brushing your teeth is a modern habit. It isn't. Scientists have found grooves worn into fossilized human teeth over 1 million years old, evidence that something or someone was cleaning between them long before humans had language, fire, or a single word for clean. Let's start with what these grooves actually are, because the physical evidence sitting inside these fossils is more precise and more genuinely strange than most people expect. Paleoanthropologists call them interproximal grooves, thin, polished channels worn into the sides of fossil teeth, right where two teeth meet. Under a microscope, these grooves show a distinct pattern of repetitive scratching, consistent with something narrow, stiff, and slightly abrasive being dragged back and forth between the teeth over and over, for years, in the exact same direction, at the exact same angle, hundreds or even thousands of times. Not decay, not damage from chewing tough food. A repeated, deliberate motion, precise enough that researchers can often tell which hand the individual likely used, based on the angle the groove was worn at. In 2003, researcher Leslea Hlusko studied fossil teeth belonging to Paranthropus robustus, an early hominin species that lived roughly 2 million years ago in southern Africa, and found interproximal grooves present across multiple individuals, in a consistent pattern too uniform to be accidental. Her analysis compared these ancient grooves directly against grooves produced experimentally by dragging plant material between modern teeth, and the match was striking. Her conclusion was that these early hominins were regularly inserting a thin object, most likely a grass stem, a twig, or a sliver of bone, between their teeth to dislodge trapped food, a behavior consistent enough across individuals to suggest it was widespread, not a rare personal habit belonging to just one or two members of the group. This wasn't an isolated case, either. Similar grooves have since been documented in fossil teeth from multiple early human species, spanning well over 1 million years of prehistory, found at sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia, on specimens that never had any contact with one another. Long before humans had a word for hygiene, something was already driving this exact behavior, consistently, across different species, for an extraordinarily long stretch of time. So what was actually motivating it? The most direct explanation is pain. Trapped food between teeth causes pressure and irritation almost immediately, and left untreated, that irritation can progress into something far more dangerous. A cavity, an abscess, an infection with nowhere to safely drain. For most of human history, a dental infection wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was a genuine, sometimes fatal medical emergency, with no dentist, no antibiotics, and no way to manage the swelling once it spread into the jaw or bloodstream. An abscess left untreated could, and sometimes did, kill an otherwise perfectly healthy adult within days, a death with no obvious external cause, no wound, no visible illness, just a small, ignored problem in the mouth that grew into something the body couldn't fight off. The simplest possible defense, dislodging trapped debris before it caused a problem, would have been enough to meaningfully reduce that risk, without requiring any understanding of bacteria, infection, or medicine at all. Ancient hominins likely weren't following a hygiene routine in any conscious sense, and almost certainly had no concept of bacteria, infection, or disease. They were responding to raw physical discomfort, the same way you'd instinctively probe at something stuck in your teeth right now, without needing anyone to explain why it felt wrong. No plan, just instinct repeated. But repeated often enough, across an entire lifetime spent using the exact same motion on the exact same teeth, that instinctive response left a permanent, measurable signature in the fossil record, one that survived for the researchers who would eventually find it, millions of years later. Here's where it gets stranger, though, because the evidence doesn't stop at simple toothpicking. In 2012, researcher Karen Hardy and her team analyzed dental calculus, hardened ancient plaque, preserved on the teeth of Neanderthal remains from a site called El Sidrón in Spain. Trapped inside that calculus were microscopic plant particles that had survived tens of thousands of years, locked in place, waiting to be identified with modern laboratory techniques never available to anyone who might have studied these remains a generation earlier. When Hardy's team identified them, the results were unexpected. The plants weren't food. Chamomile and yarrow, both found in the calculus, have essentially no nutritional value and a notably bitter, unpleasant taste, the kind of taste that would ordinarily make an animal spit something back out rather than swallow it. What they do have is a long history of documented medicinal use across many later human cultures. Both plants contain compounds associated with reducing inflammation and easing pain. Hardy's team proposed that Neanderthals may have deliberately chewed these specific plants for their bitter medicinal properties, not for calories, self-medicating against exactly the kind of oral pain and inflammation that untreated dental problems cause. This wasn't guesswork based on plant identification alone. The specific selection, bitter, non-nutritional, and pharmacologically active, pointed toward intentional use rather than accidental ingestion, since a genuinely accidental mouthful of plant matter would be far more likely to include something actually edible mixed in alongside it. The evidence gets even more direct at a site in northern Italy, and it stops looking like accidental behavior entirely. In 2015, researchers led by Gregorio Oxilia examined a molar roughly 14,000 years old and found something that looked remarkably like an early filling. The tooth showed clear signs of a cavity that had been deliberately scraped and cleaned out using small, sharp stone tools, tool marks visible under magnification, arranged in patterns consistent with intentional, careful dental intervention rather than accidental wear or the natural progress of decay. This predates every previously known example of dental treatment by thousands of years, pushing back the known origin of deliberate dentistry further than researchers had previously believed possible. Someone over 14,000 years ago was performing what amounts to primitive, targeted dentistry on a real patient with real tools aimed at solving a real dental problem, requiring a level of precision and intent that goes well beyond simply scraping food from between two teeth. None of this happened in isolation, either. This same underlying behavior, cleaning between the teeth with a thin object, echoes forward across nearly every documented human culture that followed, appearing again and again in places with no contact with one another, arriving at nearly identical solutions independently. Ancient Egyptians used frayed twigs as early toothbrushes as far back as 3000 BCE, chewing one end until the fibers separated into something resembling soft bristles. Babylonian and Sumerian records describe nearly identical chew sticks, used the same way, for the same reason, in a completely separate part of the world. In many parts of the world today, the miswak, a twig from the Salvadora persica tree with natural antibacterial properties, is still used exactly the way it has been for thousands of years, essentially unchanged from the behavior visible in fossil teeth dating back over 1 million years earlier. Modern chemical analysis has confirmed the wood itself contains genuinely antibacterial compounds, meaning the tradition wasn't just symbolic. It was, by pure accident of trial and error, actually working. The bristled toothbrush most people use today is startlingly recent by comparison, first appearing in China sometime around the 1400s, using boar bristles set into a bone or bamboo handle. Everything before that, and much of what continued alongside it for centuries afterward, traces directly back to that same original instinct. Something stuck, something hurts, get it out. So the next time you brush your teeth, understand what you're actually continuing, not a modern invention. Not something dreamed up by a dentist in the last few centuries. Behavior stretching back well over 1 million years, driven by the exact same discomfort, solved with whatever tool happened to be within reach, refined slowly across an almost unimaginable span of time into the specific, deliberate motion you now perform without thinking twice about where it actually came from. The tools changed constantly. Grass stems, bone slivers, bitter plants, frayed twigs, boar bristles, nylon. The reason behind the motion never did. Somewhere on a fossil, millions of years old, sits a groove worn by the exact same discomfort you'd feel right now with a piece of food stuck between your own teeth. Different species, different continent. Different everything, except the one thing that mattered enough to leave a permanent mark in stone.